I think that the market is tremendous. It's huge. I mean, you're talking in ASEAN. I think that, 400 million people are underserved by the banks in ASEAN alone. And in China, it's slightly different because, they don't have as many borders, so, you can cross-border with digital and all that. But in ASEAN, that 400 million stays there, and the question is, how will the banks access it? If they can access it and find a way to deliver the services in a cost-managed manner, cost-effective manner, I mean, that's a whole new market, isn't it? I mean, not tapped, just waiting. May not be worth their trouble, but if they find the right partners to do it with, whether it's a telco or fintech, and smaller banks maybe, they could be a large bank working with collaboration with smaller banks like rural banks or, the BPRs in Indonesia, that would be the way to go forward, and we can serve this market. The other banks are basically people who are underserved by the banks. They can be most people in ASEAN, basically not being able to access to a bank easily, whether because of distance or whether because of income or maybe because of age. They basically can't access banking services easily. That's the underbanked. Cost. Because for most banks, the cost of delivering a service to the underbanked may not be something that they're willing to go out to do. A lot of people think that, banks might be running on low costs, but then again, to acquire a customer, banks actually spend quite a fair bit. And these customers can be very far away for the banks to acquire and may not be worth their trouble unless they acquire them in masses. I don't think the underbanks are higher risk because usually it may be perceived that way because they are unknown. The data has not been collected. We don't know who they are. We may not identify them. But they in themselves may not be necessarily higher risk because, in general, you're talking about the entire group of them. Maybe a small group might be higher risk because they've got nothing better to do than to hack you, right? But the larger group, perhaps not. So I think we need to be a little bit more careful when we say they're higher risk. The risk has not been clearly identified. I think that is a better way to phrase it. And once we've identified the risk and identified the parameters to look for, then actually the risk drops there like any other banking customer. And in fact, because the volumes by way of the actual transaction counts are higher, but for smaller values, actually the risks in themselves can be very well managed instead of like a high transaction value. On a low transaction count, you're talking about high transaction counts and low transaction value. So you can stop transactions, you can stop a loan, you can do various things. So I would not quite agree that they're higher risk. I think from a regulator's perspective, I think no regulator in ASEAN or in Asia, for that matter, in any emerging market can ignore the underbanked. Why? Because they create a political pressure in the system. They are the people that needs banking services, financial services to prosper. They need it to grow wealth, they need it to send money, they need it to do things with their lives, right? And unless the banks or financial services can take care of this large group of people en masse, the country cannot ever quite prosper, so to speak, right? So at the end of the day, regulators are concerned about this, and I would say that out of most ASEAN countries, the regulators have gone out to say, how can we in fact serve this and how can we encourage the banks to go out to do it? And if the banks don't do it, who is going to do it? And let's find people who will do it and let's encourage these people to do it because this group of people will be where the votes are going to come from. I think the underbanked should be served by both the fintechs working in partnership with the banks so that the risk is well managed because the cost of delivery can then be managed from the perspective the fintech can come up with innovative solution and yet meet what the bank may require or the central banks may require, and there is a shielding off. So there is the management of that by working between the banks and the fintech. Numoni, for example, in our ecosystem, we own a bank. We own a small Filipino bank, but nonetheless, as a fintech, we own a bank in the Philippines. Proudly so, and we're transforming it to become a digital bank with the blessing of the BSP.